Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Awakening of Roku chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 23, which is called Corruption. I'll again mention I do have YouTube channel membership available on the channel if you'd like to help support. At the higher tier, you'll gain early access to videos in this series as I record them, and also exclusive videos I put up once a month on the channel. But yeah, let's get into this important chapter. We, of course, continue on from where we left off with Roku, which was that he woke up, he opened his eyes, and he was in the mouth of the serpent. And we continue on here as we start this chapter with the kind of memory, dream connection with Avatar Karuk, with Roku in the mouth, in the throat, basically, of this former guardian spirit that has been corrupted. And we get the details on that as we go through, as well as some very interesting kind of reveals about things that we didn't know about kind of Karuk's life in relation to like his fight with the spirits, that are very interesting and kind of mysterious in terms of what they're doing with this kind of reveal. But anyway, let's get into this here. So yeah, Roku inside the spirit has no idea what way he's kind of facing. He can't do anything to maneuver his body to do any bending. He eventually kind of stabilizes himself against the walls of the kind of throat. He tries to firebend, but it's basically like trying to light a fire underwater. That's not going to work. So it has to be water that he goes for here. And again, remember, the whole point of building up to this connection with Karuk is also built into his whole breaking through the block on water bending as well. So they kind of use this as being the way to kind of highlight that here's the connection. Now here's the kind of water bending without it properly being Roku doing water bending just because of the situation he's in. But you still get the idea here. So yeah, he imagined the spirit as the churning sea, and he imagined himself not as some poor soul caught in the currents, but as the currents themselves, drawing energy from the undulations. This time, his hands burned with cold. He swung his arms in a circular motion, slicing the serpent's throat open from within with blades of ice. Roku kind of falls out. The head hits the ground shortly afterwards. He's chopped the spirit's head off here with water bending. We note the spirit's indigo glow dimmed, because of course it's a dark spirit, so the glow is now kind of fading away. Karuk praises Roku for this. I knew you had it in you. After all, you're me. So that's always fun to hear. Roku is like a bit like, oh, what did I just do? Did I kill it? Because the thing's head is just there. And Karuk is like, he knows. Roku, of course, wouldn't know this. Can you kill water? Spirits don't die, Avatar Roku. Their energy disperses, regathers, reorganizes. So yeah, you can't permanently kill a spirit as far as we are aware. This is kind of pretty foundational lore about how they work that we learned in the Rift comic, and has been kind of really highlighted ever since. This is a pretty important aspect of them. So yeah, this is obviously relates to like kind of Ravavatu, kind of how they work, but also just spirits in general. We saw it in that comic with General Old Iron, and we see it here with this guardian spirit. They kind of look over and they see that the head and the body kind of dissipate. They kind of fade away into energy, and the idea is that that spirit will reform kind of at a later point. So that's the kind of point there. Of course, there's questions about stuff like, say, the dark spirit bending technique that Unalaq seemed to imply would like destroy someone's soul. Now, it's unclear if that was meant to be kind of like permanent thing, or it's just a way to sort of kill someone by only doing something to their spirit. Though, it's a bit weird because technically normal spirit bending, like a human spirit, quote unquote, kills them, but it's not a permanent thing. It's complicated, this sort of dynamic. But anyway, that's what we're dealing with here. Then Roku asks, what is this? Like, what is this connection we're having here? Why is this not like a normal past avatar kind of communication? And Karuk just says it's a memory, blended with a connection, I suppose. So Roku figures out a few things at this point. Wait, you actually encountered that spirit during your lifetime? Yeah. I wasn't there though. And Karuk's just like, weren't you? Just highlighting the idea of like, that's the weirdness of this specific connection is that like it's Roku in the place of Karuk from the past, with past Avatar Karuk sort of guiding Roku through one of Karuk's own memories. It's kind of really interesting. And Roku pieces it together and is like, you are me in an earlier life, so it swallowed you whole, and then you decapitated it with your water bending from within. That's about the shape of the ice, which we find out is this archaic Northern Water Tribe idiom that's basically just meant to be, that's about the gist of it, you know, that's the summary of it. So yeah, that's that. The book clarifies, you know, which meant Roku hadn't bent water, Karuk had. So we're still sort of waiting for the idea of, I guess, back in the physical world, for Roku to actually do water bending. But the idea is, like, he's made most of the steps to get there. We just need to see that actually happen. Then he goes back to the referencing the spirit. And that creature, you said it used to be a guardian spirit. What happened to it? Something corrupted its energy. And Roku asks a follow-up question. You mean something angered it? Because from his perspective, he's like, oh, so something kind of gradually turned it dark. You know, it was angry at a situation, people doing something to it, something like that. That's what he would know about this. But Karuk says, no. I knew that spirit before. It was a protector of the North, a friend. And then one day it changed. I'd fought against enough dark spirits to sense the same energy. It wasn't anger. It wasn't simple imbalance. It was a complete inversion. And so this is really, really interesting. He has fought enough dark spirits to know the difference between a spirit that has kind of gradually over time shifted to being dark versus this more sudden, complete, like, it's good, and then all of a sudden it's all the way over here, which is what has happened here. So the idea is, what turned it? What Karuk says is, a dark spirit whose name I never learned. And this is the core of this kind of new information that we didn't know about before. This slightly new dynamic of, like, basically adding on to sort of like the different types of dark spirits that he faced. Clearly, as we learned in Shadow of Kyoshi, some of them were spirits that Yang Chen had dealings with, that she made deals with. Those deals eventually over time, over the eras, got broken, and those spirits gradually turned dark, and Karuk had to deal with them. That was what we were presented with before. Now they're presenting that wasn't every instance of this. Some of those dark spirits were corrupted by another dark spirit, a specific one that has a specific name. He explains a little bit further here. It had slipped into our realm through a stray portal and was tracking down the spirits in our world and infecting them. At least that might be the best way to put it. And this is basically what the point of Karuk trying to communicate this to Roku is, to have him make this similar connection here of something spiritual being a quote-unquote infection. Don't think of everything that is an infection as just being kind of medical type stuff. Think of spiritual infection at the same time. We're talking about dark spirits here, but what's happening to the animals? Yeah, they're being poisoned and their bodies are kind of breaking down kind of over time. But that doesn't explain some of the other effects of the poison. Whereas if you think of it as like a spiritual corruption, infection, and like the wording that was used before, an inversion of your energy, that's kind of what's happening here. And that's the big connection here. This is the point of this, in terms of, you know, Roku kind of going like, yes, that's it. When Makatuk said that there was something unnatural about this sickness, it's true. It was a corruption that imbalanced the animal's chi to such an extent that it turned them irrationally aggressive. So now it's like, wait, how does that work? How does a poison, or, you know, an illness, how is it like spiritual in nature? How does that work? Now, the obvious connection that you make at this point before you go any further is it being super literal, super direct, and this unnamed dark spirit is actually going to be a player in this book. that, okay, the Lombok Island material is the core of it, but like, has this spirit done something to this material to make it do this? Is that what we're trying to do here? Ultimately, the idea is no. This dark spirit is just this extra layer of nuance on top of Karuk's story. And I think there's a little bit more we get on it as we'll get to it. But that's what we learn for now about this. So I'll come back to the Karuk stuff in just a second, but we'll progress through the chapter here. So we've made our big connection at this point. Then Roku asks, how did you rebalance the spirits? As in, like, we know that this is a bit of a, like, asking the wrong question to Karuk here. Like, he never found a way to do this. And Karuk looks over at, like, where the serpent used to be. Did it look like I rebalanced that one? Roku said nothing, of course. He continues and says, I never figured out a way. Though I'd mastered all 4 elements and the avatar state, manipulating spirit energy was beyond me. I never found anyone who could do it. The only way to end the spreading corruption was to drive the dark spirit back into its own world through a portal and defeat it there. So, this is the point. I think we all made this after Shadow of Kyoshi, and that is that if only Karuk had access to spirit bending, that would have solved his problems, being able to just have a technique that alters the balance of a spirit, rather than the only way he found to deal with these things, which was to basically fight the spirit. Fight it in the physical world, fight it into the spirit world, kill it there, corrupt his own spirit kind of in the process, having to do such kind of grisly work in all of this. And that's the tragedy of Karuk as a character. And obviously we're building up to something if you know Makotoke as a character, but in his era he never found anyone who could do it, which is the real unfortunate situation in all of this. Now, I do think it's very interesting they specifically highlight it as he had to drive it into the spirit world and defeat it there. And it's kind of like, like, well, so it wouldn't have worked if you just killed the spirit in the physical world. Now, I get the idea of, like, I guess he doesn't want it to almost like immediately respawn back in the physical world and almost have the same thing happen again. It would eventually realize its situation, the same imbalance it suffered from before would probably gradually happen to it again. Whereas if you take a spirit that's already in the physical world back into the spirit world, defeat it there, it kind of respawns in the spirit world and can, I suppose, theoretically choose a different path at that point, and it's not as connected to the physical world. I would have liked a little bit more nuance to kind of fully kind of dive into that situation. We know that's ultimately kind of like what he did. I'm guessing there's also the basic situation of just a dangerous spirit wanting to do everything as quick as possible to get it away from the physical world and have the fight always take place in the spirit world. Because the other point would be that he effectively, as far as we were aware, pretty much always had to use the avatar state to kind of really take down anything resembling a powerful dark spirit. He wouldn't want to be having avatar state fights in the physical world at all times. So I think all those points is kind of what they're trying to say with that. But yeah, that definitely makes sense. His only way to sort of counter dark spirits was to effectively kill them to literally reset them. And not really carefully changing their balance, but just forcibly doing it. That's the point there. And Roku's thinking about all of this, like, okay, spirits don't die. Was it possible the same dark spirit had returned to the human world? And it's so interesting the book asks that question, because I think inevitably you think about the way that this could go, and it's like, does Roku end up being the one who has to deal with this dark spirit? And the answer is like, no, it's just not a factor in this book, like, at all. But is it a thing for the future? Is that something Roku will do at some point down the line? Is it something Aang encounters? Is it something more for Pavi to do in her era? What is the setup with this unnamed dark spirit that very clearly, based on the way past life Karuk is talking about it, he never found any resolution to it. So that spirit is still out there. And that a spirit that facilitated furthering what was happening with Karuk and his kind of war against dark spirits. If there wasn't as many, maybe things wouldn't have been as bad for Karuk. it's very interesting to think about. And yeah, why else would he be here embodying this particular memory from Karuk's life? So yeah, he's trying to think about it and like, is there more to this? You know, is the connection deeper than just helping me realize there's like an energy aspect kind of going on to this, to really focus in on why does it affect someone's energy, their chi in such a way? Well, this helps to make sense to think about it. Like, in the same way spirits can become imbalanced based on their energy, that's kind of what the poison is doing to a person, and that's the point there. The final bit of the chapter is that Karuk basically is like, wake up. So he doesn't get to go any further. He gets lost in thought about this situation. He's just told to wake up, basically as like a defense mechanism almost, which is interesting because he's immediately in danger. He wakes up, he's looking around, and he should be in the kind of ice shelter thing that they're in over the frozen lake, right next to Magatuk and also Gyatso. But he looks around and Magatuk isn't there. And then Gyatso's kind of like lumbers over to him, not saying anything. He's looking a bit weird. He's kind of breathing heavily. Then he notices him when he gets a bit closer. A purple splotch, like a fresh bruise, peeked past the air nomad's collar. Spittle leaking from the corners of his mouth. His eyes were wild and vacant, pupils twitching. He was infected. Roku raised his hands, but not quickly enough. A blast of wind struck the avatar and sent him crashing through the wall. So Gyatso has been infected, and he is now attacking Roku with, of course, enhanced bending. This is our first time seeing this, but of course we were told directly what it does. It enhances physical strength, so it must enhance bending, and that's exactly what's happening here. So now, how do we deal with this? Now, technically, Roku should kind of have a response to this. He's kind of unlocked, I guess, quote-unquote, access to waterbending, but does he really want his first time using waterbending to be trying to carefully capture Gyatso? A little bit dangerous, so it's a bit of a tough situation here. But of course, the question is then, where's Magatuk gone? And this is where, like I said, they don't completely drop the Magatuk suspicion plot point. Because, yeah, this is a bit of a weird thing for her to just randomly not be here overall. Now, we'll get an explanation on this when we get into it, but it's a very interesting turn of events. The other point is, how was Gyatso infected? Because you'd think with the way that this works, or once she would want it to work, Atka would want Gyatso to be infected pretty shortly after being bitten by one of the Arctic wolves, which is, I think, your probably conclusion from this when you get to it right now. Now, there's ultimately more to it, as we'll get into it, because otherwise we were told that, like, there didn't seem to be any sign of him being infected by that bite. He was recovering from it pretty nicely, but there will be kind of more to this, of course, because, you know, Atka's in or around the area. That's the point that's been made throughout this book. Like, she's right there in or around them. She knows exactly where they are. And she seems to be a master of poisoning people. So, you know, she made a decision to not poison Roku earlier on in the book. You know, she could have done it whenever. That's the point being made here. But yeah, let's go back and have a little bit more of a discussion on the whole Karuk situation here. So, just from Shadow of Kyoshi, what we knew was that Karuk kind of had to deal with some of the kind of leftovers from the Yang Chen era. That some of her deals with spirits faded over time. The people either forgot the rules of those deals or whatever. They lost importance, and then gradually those deals were broken. And with the way the spirits typically view that, there's no nuance to it. It's just a rule has been broken. Therefore, they would gradually switch towards darkness. And this all seemed to happen in or around the Karuk era. So he had to deal with at least a couple of spirits that Yang Chen dealt with going dark. And that was sort of part of that dynamic, was Karuk keeping a lot of this to himself, in part at least to sort of protect almost the legacy of Yang Chen as this like incredible avatar, like him sacrificing his own reputation as an avatar to protect Yang Chen's. This adds extra layers on top of that with the idea that, okay, it's not just a case that like 10 spirits Yang Chen dealt with all went dark, and that's everything that Karuk had to deal with. There was also this other factor in it, and that is this unnamed dark spirit, who I think, because they highlight the significance of the name here, likely is a somewhat powerful spirit with an ability to literally flip energies straight around. Not just gradually, slowly shift a spirit towards being dark, but just like that kind of infect them and force them dark straight away. Now, of course, the main spirit we associate with Karuk is you either go Ko or Glowworm, based on like which you associate as being kind of the more big part of his story. I think if you read the novels, Glowworm is probably the more significant one, maybe like to him overall, because it seemed to have kind of impacted his life, most of it, a lot more. And actually, we're probably at the point now where the Ko situation is the one that maybe needs a little bit more detail from later on in his life. But this very clearly isn't Glowworm, because it's noted as part of kind of what happened to Karuk is that he did exchange names with Father Glowworm. That's a specific point, that Karuk was sort of cursed. In a way, the Avatar was connected to Glowworm because of this like formal exchange of names. They kind of note this kind of unusual dynamic here because of how powerful Glowworm is as a spirit. So it's clearly not that. Now, it seems like this spirit did take advantage, I guess, of... You have to assume that what they're referring to with the whole stray portal thing is probably Glowworm, leaving his little rifts between realities kind of in place, which was a big part of like the way they presented like Shadow of Kyoshi. And so, you know, that's the intelligence of this dark spirit, sort of like targeting that idea, tracking down spirits who might be inclined towards imbalance and infecting them to guarantee that that happened. And it clearly is, it is something that happens at some stage into his war with the spirits. Like, he's fought dark spirits before, to the point that he knew the first one that was infected was different than the other ones. So it seems like this starts to happen, I guess, before Glowworm. This is where like it's tricky, I think, with the continuity there, where we don't probably have enough detail full on to do this. But that'd be kind of my assumption, is that this dark spirit comes into play probably pre-Glowworm, and probably actually post-Glowworm as well, is still kind of doing stuff. Before, I guess, becoming a little bit inactive. Because clearly Karuk has the time to sort of settle down more as a character as you get into the kind of final years of his life with Umi and everything that happened before the Ko situation once again takes him down the kind of spirit hunting kind of path once more. It's really interesting, especially because it is clearly something that happens a bit like further into his era, in the sense that even if we are getting Karuk books next, as in like Chronicles of the Avatar 7 and 8 will be Karuk's duology, I think we're fully expecting them both to be like teenage Karuk. Now, this book, Awakening of Roku, seems to highlight that at the very least a somewhat substantial time skip is a possibility. So maybe book 2 for Karuk can approach tackling this to a certain degree. But like I said, Karuk never learns the name of this dark spirit, so there's only so much you can do with this. And it kind of speaks to the idea of, because it's not actually significant to like the Roku plot point as such, what's it really being brought up for? It helps to get the connection across to Roku with the idea being that like, oh, there was a spirit who effectively infected spirits to go dark, not just gradual imbalance. Infecting them to go dark. Wait, that's kind of what the poison is doing. That's the connection the book is asking you to make. So the requirement of this dark spirit is kind of there to make that connection, but it's also a massive piece of lore for Karuk. So it's like, are we doing anything more with this? Is there a bigger plan in terms of how this interlinks into everything? I really want to know. Because otherwise, it comes across like kind of like another Randy Rabai kind of mention of a notable spirit who doesn't get a name. Like the two spirits from that were basically young Gip from the first book. And that could be a little bit frustrating. But who knows? Maybe they might stretch what a duology is able to do, and they might have something that they can do with this. In that, like, if they do kind of highlight something, like say with book 2, that like they maybe cover more details on the start of his issue with dark spirits. If you make this dark spirit like a villain and have scenes from the perspective, you could have some of these reveals happen without Karuk ever coming across it, just to reveal the intent of this dark spirit in terms of what's going on. There's ways you can get to it, of course, but it's just like, wow, very, very interesting that like just 2 or 3 lines about this situation is something you can do like a whole discussion on. And like the rest of the stuff happening in this chapter is really, really interesting. But that one line of just a dark spirit whose name I never learned is so thought-provoking that it just makes me go, what does it mean exactly? So I'm going to wrap up the video there. Of course, let me know what your thoughts were on the whole chapter here. The rest of the kind of vision with Karuk, Gyatso at the end being revealed to be infected, what the connection from the vision is meant to be for Roku, with connecting the dots of like basically corruption, infection, that dynamic. And then especially, what do you make of this pretty substantial addition onto kind of Karuk's story here and his fight against the dark spirits, that there was another dark spirit making other spirits dark that he would have to fight against? What do you make of this? Let me know. But yeah, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.